Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the next episode of Overwatch.
The Toronto Defiant will not be denied.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very special episode of CA Overwatch. As you guys can see, we are joined by a special guest. You know, I'm one of your hosts, Spencer. With me is Chris, and with us today, the one and only Yiska himself. So, Yiska, why don't you just give a quick little introduction before we sort of get into this roster breakdown?
Hey, Yiska. I'm a sort of late bloomer into like having started esports journalism full time in pretty much like last year. Basically, like as the pandemic started, I started going full time, which was fortunate because beforehand I was teaching. I just shut up.
The video's off. That's okay. Technical difficulties. I'd love to see it.
And since then, I've mostly covered the Overwatch League. Have also dabbled in a couple of other scenes, looking towards Valorant now. And yeah, generally speaking, reporting on in a league movements such as you might have seen, for instance, information about like how the season's structured. That was a report we did before. We did a couple of roster moves this year. Eased a little bit into that. So yeah, that's generally my output in the scene.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll leave all that like links in the description below in case anybody is seeing this who for some reason knows us, doesn't know you. They want to check you out. But I actually I like that you brought that up because I actually really like the fact that you started leaking roster information this offseason. I think that is, again, I know some people hate it, some owners hate it, but I'm just such a fan of like all of that sort of juice sort of being leaked. And I know we have kind of Halo in the scene, and I still defend Halo for the most part. Like, he's gotten some wrong, but I still think at the very least, if you can get that wording a little bit better and let people know what is like a confirmed thing versus what is like, here's what I'm hearing. I still like that. I just think it's good content in the scene. And then I think somebody like yourself who is very much like, okay, you know, always accurate, never missing. I always make that joke because I think we have two leaks and we've gotten both right. And so I always say like Yiska and us are the only 100% leakers of the scene. Yeah,
very true. Yeah.
So I like that. I like that content moving forward from you. I think it's good.
It keeps it interesting, right? Like, we have an off season that's like 8 months long, and we're just sitting here waiting. And when stuff like that happens, you need the guys to give the leaks. And even if it isn't right, even if something like that isn't right, it just keeps it interesting.
Well, I think there's a difference between, hey, this is what happened, and then it's not wrong, as opposed to like, hey, this team is interested in this player. Because that happens in traditional sports all the time. You hear like the Raptors are looking to sign this player, or they want to trade, or this person's on the trading block. If it was just like this player is looking into this player and then it doesn't happen, like that doesn't mean they didn't look into them. Like, I still want to know that information. I still find that cool. It just needs to be different than a sure thing.
One thing that I find really funny is the amount of correlations people make when people follow each other. They're like, wow, like X person has followed the coaching staff and players of this organization. Like, wow, gonna pick them up. It's like
that's the weird thing. I think it started ever since like Hydration's mom following someone at the Shock.
Yeah,
it has been like the tool. And honestly, I think like the idea behind it is like, of course, like everyone kind of knows now. Sometimes you catch like a Korean player that isn't aware of that pattern, people looking at it. But there are underlying patterns where sometimes I can cold call based on a Twitter follow that was strategically placed, just knowing a little bit of, like behind the scenes stuff, where you can go like to someone and go like, you sent that guy? Then it's like, how do you know that?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't, but now
you do. Yeah.
This is.
So are we learning about your leak strategy right now?
I mean, this is not really like
any.
Yeah, I don't report on that. Like, basically, think of it like I probably have seen ink on paper if I put out a roster leak, right? Like, it's unless someone really, really wants to mess with me, it's not going to be wrong, right? Like, so in that regard. Yes, I do like what you guys said about like the keeping the off season fresh. I do think I've realized the utility in it. It also gives a lot of credibility.
Yeah.
I still caution towards like being aggressive about it, and we also saw a lot of misuse. And I'm not talking about Halo.
No, I know what you
I'm
mean.
talking, about the other Twitter accounts that just get it completely wrong, and that actually causes real-world damage. Why? Because keep in mind, like, yes, you can say that a lot of the damage that is caused is on the organizations not following up on whatever is being leaked, right? Mm-hmm. And that much is true. That said, keep in mind that there's a human element to be considered. So once an idea enters the scene, and it is treated as such, then it forms sort of opinions about how things work. So, for instance, I felt partially like responsible for misunderstanding how the two-way rule worked initially. So I thought, like, once you play more than the maximum amount of two ways, it would transfer your contract into a full-time Overwatch League contract, and you wouldn't have a problem. You could just, well, in sort of like in season 2, that didn't happen. Fusions wasn't allowed to do that. It was called off the stage like 15 minutes before the game was going to happen, and that was the first ever Shanghai Dragons victory of their franchise history. So, while of course it's on the Boston Uprising to check this out, and it's also, of course, also on the Overwatch League to recognize this earlier, I felt like, as sort of like the creator of that thing in my mind, just because it made sense to me, that this entered the ether and therefore people made wrong assumptions, and that caused damage in the end, right?
Yeah. Well, to be honest,
also,
sorry, Chris, you can go.
I was gonna say, I mean, Yiska, it's also a good testament to you and possibly how much influence you have. I mean, hey, to get something wrong, to think that it actually made that.
I'm not sure if it was me, right? Like, why? I can't look into the Boston Uprising's collective mind how that worked, right?
But, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was like, I wouldn't put that on you at all. Like, at the end of the day, if you give an opinion on how you think a contract situation, like, you're not paid by an organization to look at contracts, right? Like, if you were, I'm sure you would have known the difference. Like, at that point, like, personally, like, I put that on the people behind the scenes who, like, that's their, like, literal job. Like you said, you do a bunch of different stuff, right? You're in multiple different esports. I think it's unfair to sort of put that whole or any onus on you. Like, I would definitely be like, hey, the person whose job it is, the person who's getting paid to kind of figure this stuff out should have probably known that. I mean, I know there's a human element, like, people make mistakes, like, that's life. So I'm not gonna, like, hit them too hard. Sure. But at the same time, like, that's sort of how I would perceive that whole thing. And yeah, when it comes to the leaks, I think you're somewhat right, or mostly right. I think, like, it really needs to become clear if somebody's interested in a player or if somebody's not. And, like, I wouldn't really let, like, people's opinions. I don't think this is what you meant, but there are some people who are like, oh, if, it comes out that Toronto is interested in a player or New York is interested in a player, and the fans are, like, upset at that, or they think that player is bad, that all of a sudden the organization's going to be like, well, maybe we shouldn't sign that player, and it's going to cost the player. And, I mean, that might be the case, but if that is the case, I think that's a big issue. Like if you're interested in a player, you should not let what, like, Little Jimmy 425 thinks about the player acquisition, right? Like, if you're interested in a player, you should go after that player because, like, your scouting team, your coaches, they're the ones who are interested in. Like, I don't think you should let the public's opinion really affect you. But that's just my opinion. I don't know how, like, it really works, but I would assume that it wouldn't. Yeah.
It also creates sometimes unhealthy expectations in the community, I feel. So, for instance, if you hear that Gabushi has the Gladiators have won the buyout for a total of $500,000 US, that's a complete misreading of the market this year.
Yeah.
Like, that just doesn't make any sense. And then if that player then ends up on Boston Academy, that's, like, worlds apart from what the community should be thinking about that guy, right? So, yeah, like, in that regard, I caution to, like, only listen to sources that have really solid hit rates. And I would, like, I mean, Halo with, I think it's 50 out of 53 in terms of roster reportings. In that regard, like, he has a great track record, right? There,
no, in terms of, like, random Twitter accounts that pop up my feed, and then, like, you and Halo, when you guys, like, tweet some stuff, I listen. I don't really listen to the other stuff. Like, I might report on it because, again, it's a 8-month off season and I got nothing else to talk about.
Right.
And just sort of theory craft it. But very at the beginning of that video, be like, this is a theory craft. This is not a reliable source. Like, here is sort of just my opinion if it were to be true. Gables is actually interesting, and we can probably get into him later because I was really surprised that he ended up on Boston Academy. Like, I never expected the whole 500 buyout thing to be true. But I thought, somebody would get him, especially once, WGS like split apart and that buyout was no longer a thing. I know that was a hurdle that stopped some teams, that they didn't want to actually pay for his buyout on top of his salary, because I believe that's how the contract situation works in Korean contenders. But once that buyout was removed, I was surprised not to see a team like Philadelphia, for instance, who's actually in Korea this season, or the LA Gladiators potentially try to pair him alongside Muse. Because I was surprised to see like Piggy go, and Piggy's really talented. I think Piggy's good. But there's a few off things like Michelle from Toronto, but Gabe Lassie not be one of the ones to get that sort of official Overwatch League contract. I was really surprised by that.
Yep. And that is part of the stories that we tell about people, right? Yeah. Probably the same about Muse. I think a lot of people think Muse is like 1A, 1B to Mac. Nobody thinks this in the Overwatch League.
I agree.
Right?
I'm glad you had that. Yeah.
So it is like sometimes it's like narratives break loose. I don't mind it as much if people are just like, like hyped up, and that's like it turns out, yes, the fall from grace from the expectations can also put a lot of pressure on the player. It's better than them artificially being undervalued and therefore never seeing the light of the Overwatch League. Mm-hmm. Right?
No, so, I agree. I didn't think you underestimate the potential like storylines can affect a player's stock, but you're right. Sorry, Chris, you can go.
No, exactly. I was just saying, let's get to the meat and potatoes of today. That was a great little offshoot right there. But today, Spencer kind of alluded to it first. We're gonna go, give like a general NA roster breakdown today. Keep it high level. Talk about the teams. Talk about what we're excited about. What we're concerned about. Maybe just do a quick little Q&A at the end. But apart from that, just really keep it light. We want to be able to give you guys, an understanding of what you guys can expect from each team this year. So I think what we're going to do, go through it in, alphabetical order there. Yeah.
So no leaks in the power rankings. Nobody knows, just alphabetical order. That's how we're going to talk about it.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
we'll
definitely
do ours
not
later.
there.
Yeah.
So first one on the list here, Atlanta Reign. And this could be an interesting one. I really want to get your two, Yiska and Spencer's opinion on the Atlanta Reign, because a lot of people have them rated pretty highly here.
Right. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go for it. You're the guest.
Yeah. So I had like a long interview with Sefi just to probe his idea on roster building. And I think I got the idea that the concept of a player-driven team, in terms of like having drive, having the grind and the solo queue stuff, having them understand how things work internally, and not having like the helicopter parenting approach to like, outlining every single strategy you need to run, every single rotation, and like scripting gameplay. That seems to be the approach for the Reign. And if I understood Brad correctly, they actually managed to now have a roster of 7. I think they have 7 players, right? That all are bought into the grind and just are playing like ridiculous amounts of solo queue games. They have also like a ceiling. So they I think per season you need to play like, what was it? I don't want to say the wrong. It's either 100 or 300 games of main role solo queue on the main account, right? And they take solo queue pretty seriously, or duo queue, whatever, but ranked. Yeah. And I also like another thing that I think is a little bit underrated is just how amazing Brad is at scouting DPS players.
Yeah,
and he did it again. He did it once again.
I don't get
like from the outside. Once again, like the story that we tell of us of the Atlanta Reign is like, oh yeah, they're these middling teams that sometimes can punch up. Yes, in the second season they were actually pretty good. Then they can upset like a Shock in the playoffs and whatnot. Like that, these types of stories, yes, they are acknowledged, but then also like I felt like last season they were like, almost like underappreciated for being a really decent team, right? So if you look at that and the story we tell ourselves about the Atlanta Reign, it almost doesn't make sense that a guy like Pelican would go to the team like this. That's not the idea that players have of the Atlanta Reign, is basically my understanding what Brad told me.
Yeah,
it's like they have a high appreciation of whatever Atlanta provides, they enjoy the teammates or know that these guys are all bought in, and therefore they can work as a team. And Pelican, for me, like rookie of the year candidate for sure.
Yeah,
you already answered one of our questions.
Yeah, I was going to say one of our questions would be who do you have rookie of the year? I think Pelican's a great shout. So I think my opinion is pretty similar to a degree. I think this is arguably like seriously the best DPS in the league. And we can have debates over a few others, but in terms of just having all of your bases covered and the ceiling, I think these three can reach. I honestly would put them in that category. I think they're incredibly elite, and I think that one of the stories that isn't talked about enough is, and I don't know how hot this take is, but the potential upgrade a player like Lars can be over somebody like Dogman, and that's not knocking Dogman and in any way, shape, or form. Like, he was pretty good last year, and he's on, like, if you haven't seen his content, the Dustin Bowerman show is absolutely fantastic. So he's killing it right now, and I think that's great. I love that show. But there was definitely moments last year where I looked at that team, and people talked about the tank line, people talked about, where's Ursa, and I felt like there was actually moments last year where Dogman was actually the one kind of struggling. I remember, like, Toronto really couldn't get over that hump, and we finally beat Atlanta Reign. I went back and watched the VODs, and I was like, oh man, like his lamp usage wasn't on par, and that could have just been a bad game. I didn't watch all the Atlanta Reign games last year. I want to make that very clear. So it's a combination of potentially that, but also I've heard really, really good things about Lars. Like, we had or Iris. It's Iris. I'm saying Lars. It's Iris. I'm so dumb.
Iris
I know it's Iris
It
too.
used to be.
Yeah, but it got changed.
Because he didn't know that it wasn't that.
Yeah, my bad. Anyway, sorry, Iris. We had his contenders coach by Zenith on the show to talk about the potential ceilings of the certain players on Third Impact, and he always talked incredibly highly of Iris and sort of that ceiling he can reach. And when you pair somebody like that alongside, I think, a really, really good main support, an underrated main support in Masa, on top of the fact that they have arguably one of the best DPSs in the leagues, I think the ceiling is actually quite high for this team. I'm a pretty big fan of this roster, and you can look at the tank line and say what you want. I've actually thought Gator played pretty well last year. I thought Hawk was a little bit inconsistent, had some pretty high highs, had some pretty lower lows. But if he can really figure that out, and again, they have the proper support structure, I actually really think this is a good team, and I agree that they got a little bit underrated last year somehow. And the final point I'll make is I agree with the solo queue thing. I actually put a decent amount of stake into that. I think some people kind of gloss over it as if who cares, it's just ranked, it's not meaningful. But never look into how much beneficial it can be by just putting a lot of time into your craft. When you look at, like, the most successful people across any industry, I think one of the highest correlations is just how much time they spend perfecting their craft. And even though ranked isn't Overwatch League in any way, shape, or form, it's not like they're watching Netflix, right? Like, it's still a benefit in some way, shape, or form. So I like the fact that they're all ready to grind. And no, I think this team has a pretty high ceiling.
Well, here's a thought, and here's a thought to what you said, Yiska. If I'm thinking right, I'm guessing, hey, they're practicing a lot of solo queue, a lot of ranked. What that translates to me is that it's going to help them with their disorganized play during Overwatch League games.
If it gets there.
So that means it's going to help them in mid fight, right? When your strategies kind of break down against the organized play. What do you think is more valuable then? That early fights where that organization does play more of a part, or the mid fight where things are more disorganized?
Now, I think we almost need to consider season structure in that conversation, because I think like last year, like the weekly hero pools, you want a team that just is really good at, like, coming up with solutions on the fly.
Yeah.
I think now there's more time to figure out metas. And I expect, for instance, teams, let's say, probably Dallas would be a team that would peak late into a specific meta.
I agree.
These types of things will matter in that regard. So, a thing that can't be underestimated is, like, how the tournament structure works out for these teams, because sometimes, like, the way we have set up is, like, we have every weekend that a team plays, they have to play 2 games, right? A team like the Atlanta Reign would probably like to have the first week every single time, and not the off week, while everyone else already has a better idea, right? So that's, I think, generally speaking, like, the mid-fight stuff, it really depends also a little bit on the meta, how easy trading is and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see. I think in general, we still have fluctuations, much more than we used to in the first 2 seasons in terms of the meta, because like it's monthly now that it changes. And I'm also not entirely sure if the first week will always be the final meta that we're playing in Hawaii, so to speak. So there will be some changes throughout those situations where it's just like going to be last minute, or someone comes up with something interesting in week 2. So yeah, I think still that property favors Atlanta Reign, and I think, they, even though I think only having 7 man is like cutting it close in terms of you want redundancies in an unknown situation, right? Like you want to have someone that can step in if anything happens in a year still as wild as 2021. They don't have that many options there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, that's a good thought. Okay, moving on to next one, Boston Uprising. This is an interesting one because Spencer and I just covered a video, and they were one of the 2 kind of teams we thought had the biggest chance of improving from last year.
One of the 3 most improved teams, yeah.
One of the 3, yes. So, I mean, shoot at me. Like, Spencer, recap that first. Why do you think that? And Yiska, let's get your comments on it too after.
I think with this team, you're looking at something. I mean, in terms of just why they're most improved, just because they're the worst team in the league last year. Let's just be serious here, right? They were a bit of a shit show. And like not even in a good way. Like I personally felt like they almost like didn't even try. Like they went out there and they got some interesting pieces. But I think that I would have liked to have seen them make more of an effort. And I think that's exactly what you saw this year. Like they made an effort, right? Like they didn't just go out there and get some interesting pieces, but they got some like really interesting pieces. I think they put together a pretty competitive team. I think that they got some of the best parts of like WGS, right? Like you got Faith and Valentine come in there. That support line of Faith and Myungbong, I think, has a really high ceiling. I've heard some pretty good things about Faith. I was a big fan of Valentine. He was actually probably the number 1 person I think I wanted Toronto to go after before they picked up Neist. I think he has a pretty high ceiling as well. And then in terms of like Stand 1's good. I like the idea of maybe it lights a fire under Fusion's ass and you get him in maybe like a Ryan specialist role where I think he can really excel in. Their DPS is like pretty interesting with, again, running out Valentine. You get the leadership of like, and the veteranship of someone like Soon. I'm37, again, was in the league for Toronto for a short period of time. The talent was always there. He just was a very raw prospect, and I'm hoping this more time will allow him to grow and kind of reach those highs. And he was, again, good in Korean contenders. There's definitely some question marks here. The biggest one, again, being what happens with Gablessy. Does Gablessy get promoted from the Boston Academy to the main roster? Because if he does, I actually think their ceiling is pretty high. Like Stand 1, Gablessy, Valentine, I'm37, Faith Valentine is like actually sneaky good. Like people talk about, like I think it's sneaky good. Like those starting 6. The problem is 1, a little bit meta dependent. 2, will you hit a meta where that can be your starting 6? And also 3, will Gablessy be promoted? So that's sort of my quick little high level thought. But I think they're pretty good.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I have to add to that is interesting that I'm not sure if Punk is clearly worse.
Then
and
Gablessy.
That's interesting. Yes.
Interesting.
Like, I'm not sure. Like, Boston must believe the same thing, right? For them to move like this, they did in the market, because like, I don't know how. Like, it's already a little strange from once again the story we told ourselves about GBS, that he ends up on an academy team instead of Overwatch League.
I agree.
But like, I mean, you don't necessarily, if you know you can get that guy and you think he's better than Punk, you probably just don't like extend the contract that Punk had and just like sign GBS for main team anyway. So that communicates to me that they believe that Punk brings something to the team that either GBS lacks or doesn't have yet, right? So, and it's not like GBS is an unknown quantity for them either, right? So, in that regard, it is interesting that this move. Of course, like if there was a most likely to be promoted from two-way to main roster, that's the guy, right? Like, who else would? Yeah, there wouldn't be too many other like candidates for that award, but yeah, I think they are sneaky good. It's going to be interesting. Like a little bit of it is like a trial by fire for Laurie, who it's interesting. Like, I'm not sure if they could have just said, let's go full Korean and let's just try. But in the end, like, they're going for a hybrid roster. Yeah. They kept a lot of their players there. And to me, this screams almost like someone wants to prove, like, whatever gigantic footsteps that were left from Krusty.
Yeah.
Someone wants to prove to be able to step up into them, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see. That's a really interesting storyline for me.
Yeah.
Coming into the next season.
I agree about Punk to a degree. I think Punk is good. Like when I say Gablesy can bring this team over, I don't think that's a knock on Pump. I just think Gablesy was really good. I'm surprised to see him on an academy team. I watched him in Korean Contenders. His tape looked really good. I think he had a pretty high ceiling, and I've heard really good things about him, behind the scenes. So, but you're right. At the end of the day, he ended up on an academy team. So, why is that the case? I don't know. But I still think he's a good talent. So we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. Next one, Dallas Fuel. So, I mean, this is interesting. And from my standpoint, I guess I'll start this one off to give my opinion because I haven't given much yet. This is cool because, I mean, we have kind of the Dallas Fuel, which has transplanted a lot of the good pieces from former Paris Eternal with, XE and Sparkle. But they have made a little bit of switch up, especially in their support line, which people could argue is good or bad. Like getting rid of Crimzo, we could debatably say that he was one of the shining points of Dallas Fuel last year.
Yeah.
But they gutted him to clearly go all Korean roster. At the same point, they still have people like Repel, and you could also debate, which one is better, like Repel or Crimzo. And then
they got Fielder too, but
they also have Fielder, but I feel like those are kind of the points to focus on as well. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this team, I mean, again, I think the support line is a question mark. I mean, Fielder looked great at points last year playing on ping. Kenny, come here without ping and improve. And, was he a little of an unknown talent who looked good because, I don't know, Paris was a good team in an A, or like, how's he going to perform this year is a question mark. I find it weird that they went with, again, Jexe and Repel. Like, I didn't watch Houston last year and be like, man, this support line needs help. Like, you know what I mean? They didn't really necessarily stand up to Matt a ton to me. And again, they don't have a tracer player, so this is a team that could potentially struggle depending on the meta. This is one of those teams where the meta hits them correctly. Sparkle can play Doomfist. Sparkle can play Genji. I think they can punch with the best of them, right? XC and the McCree. Fearless gets a monkey meta, right? I think this is going to be one of those teams that will very much have highs and lows based around what is the meta comp that is being played. Their support line has some question marks. I think they can figure it out, and the power everywhere else in the roster, I think, can make up for it. I think the lack of tracer players are arguably a little bit more concerning. I think this will be a very meta-dependent team.
Yeah. It feels like, so initially talking about, with like Overwatch League internals about how the Dallas Fuel looked, it was like they pointed out the backline as a glaring issue.
Yeah.
A lot of people thought Fielder was a little bit overhyped. At the same time, like the guy was also playing on ping. So that like some playstyles just don't work. He was most like a lot of the time a heal bot on Ana, right? Yeah. Like I think he had the highest heals per 10 of Ana in the league over a representative amount. I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do off ping, right?
Yeah.
By the way, the same is true for Iris. So maybe the flex support position is not that problematic. Also, I think a lot of people, I mean, whoever shows up a lot in kill feeds is almost like synonymously, understood to be a good player. Not always true for a main support position. And Jexe had pop-off moments for sure last season. Also didn't look to be like the problem per se. But like, we're talking about a team that's trying to be one of the best in the Overwatch League in 2021. There's a lot of teams that are really good. I'm not sure if you can get away with, like, keep in mind, like, who are they competing against, or should be anyway at the top? It's like Moth, it's like FD God.
Exactly.
Like these caliber of players, and they have them on other positions. I think like Sparkle is a transcendental talent that probably, like, on the two picks that he has, probably the best Genji and Doomfist left in the Overwatch League. So I don't know. Like this team on paper should be doing very well. Like, I mean, if the scrimbucks are to be believed that have been put out in terms of like the power rankings from players that are in the know, I'm thinking Mickey and Crimzo talking about it.
Exactly.
They're not doing that well. I'm also not that concerned for them yet. Like, for instance, I also talked to Tasmo this offseason. They noticed like they are pretty good at picking up patterns.
Yeah.
And if you look at first week next to second week next, it's like night and day, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That totally makes sense. That's a good thought too. And moving on to the next one, Florida Mayhem. So thoughts on that, and also I want to get your guys' specific thoughts on OGE because I feel like he is a owl caliber tank that had some good moments in LA Gladiators, but I feel like there's something just that wasn't right. I want to know if you guys think that's going to change with Florida Mayhem.
So that's a special story to me because like for the publication we work for, we did like a long form or like a mini documentary basically on this particular topic of the Florida Mayhem, them being one of the worst orgs in the Overwatch League, turning a new leaf, and then being this org that has to learn to win again, and now bringing an OGE player that yes, he didn't like completely get stomped out in any of his teams that he played with, also didn't have like the greatest like achievements throughout his career, right? So this guy definitely still has something to prove. He's the only main tank for them. He's coming into a roster that has pretty incredible potential, huge like shoes to fill. Also because I think a lot of people like coming around to think that Fate is like one of the best tanks in the Overwatch League, especially because like he didn't have to have a backup tank or didn't need one, right? Mm-hmm. So in that regards, like I think this is almost like a now or never position where I'm not sure if OG can find another potential top team if this doesn't go like well for him, right? So this is his chance, and I felt like throughout the interview it kind of felt like that he realizes he's not nervous about this. He seems pretty confident in his ability. This is his first Korean only speaking team, which is a big one. So we'll see.
I think this is one of the better ways to like build a roster. I like the idea of like keeping together a core of a successful roster. I think sometimes teams just tear stuff down when they don't really need to and almost like blow it up. But I'm also not of the belief that like, hey, even if you have a successful year, if other teams around you improve, you also have to improve. And I think they took a look at like potentially their glaring weaknesses last year, more so in the main support position, by upgrading Slime. Because I don't know if OGE is an upgrade over Fate. I think it could be, but you're really rolling the dice there, and you know what I mean? You're hoping it comes up Snake Eyes. So I like the idea that they're like, okay, like we have our main tank, which maybe was upgraded, maybe not. But at the very least, I think a lot of people would say that Slime, again, was elite for the Vancouver Titans and Runaway before that, right? Had a bit of an interesting situation with Soul, but man, there was so much going on with Soul that I don't know how to evaluate these players, right? Again, Defiant podcast here. We get a guy like Michelle. Sure. What's going on with that situation? I've heard a lot of people are just like, oh, it's Soul. That's the reasoning I've got for why they're trying to go after Michelle. They're like, well, it's Soul, so don't put too much like stock into why he wasn't playing. So if Slime can reach the highs that he did in the previous season with Vancouver Titans, that's a really, really good support line. Checkmate, I think, has some pretty good potential. I don't really know how that's going to work out, so that's a question mark. But I mean, everything else in this roster I think is pretty high. So I think they're being a little bit overrated right now. I think people have just been like, oh yeah, they're like top 3. I've seen people put them like top 3, top 4, and I think that's still yet to be seen. But I do think they have that potential.
Yeah, exactly. And Houston Outlaws, next one. I honestly don't have a really great opinion on this, so I'd love to get your guys's, because to me, I mean, you have Dante and Hydration. I wasn't too high on those guys last year, but they've added Crimzo. I mean, once again, a really, really great piece. Last year, the Fuel, now he's adds to the Houston Outlaws. So I feel like it's a little bit of an upgrade in support line. Like, what are you guys thinking?
This is a hard team. This is a hard team to read. This is one of those teams that I think has a pretty low floor but a pretty high ceiling. One of the few. I would say that I actually like their tank line a lot. I think some people are underrating this tank line. I think this tank line has like a really high ceiling. I actually heard, again, with some of the off tanks who impressed the most in scrims throughout the offseason, I had heard it was actually Piggy and Adam were two that really stood out. So Piggy is actually debatably my pick for Rookie of the Year. And then you give him another, his main tank who he has previous chemistry with, which I think in the main tank position is extremely important. So I think people are underrating the potential impact a duo like that can have. Obviously, Happy's insane. We've seen what he can do when he can play those heroes. I think Dante's really good. Hydration, I don't know, right? He played main tank last year, so I don't know how he's going to be able to come back into a flex DPS position. I think Joby obviously is the big question mark here, coming from the collegiate scene. Obviously, I have a ton of faith in their coaching staff. I think it's another underrated part, like Junkbuck and oh my God, what's the guy's name who used to play who was with Vancouver and Harsha, thank you. Yeah. So you put those two together, I have a ton of faith in that coaching staff. I'm a huge Crimson fan, obviously Canadian bias, but I think Crimson was really underrated on the Dallas field last year. So I actually think they have some really high highs, but again, like this team could easily flame out if the communication issues are there. Who knows what the Jake coach DPS situation I think should work, but could easily not.
Yeah,
but that's my opinion. I like the tank line, so I like the team because I think they're underrated.
Right. I think the only thing that I have to add to that, and I'll give you a little bit of juice. Watch out for Happy.
Yeah.
Like,
all right.
The things I'm hearing about what Happy is currently doing, the last time I heard that is basically like the form of playoff fits or lip before season 3.
Yeah.
Right?
All
like, that's the type of stories that people tell of scrim results, basically. Like, Happy's just like finding himself, at least in these pre-season scrims at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. He was insane at points throughout his year, and this could be a new little resurgence, right? Someone gets on a new roster, they really bounce back. So I hope he does it too. I think he can.
Interesting. Now, London Spitfire, and I think this is going to be good to juxtapose against Paris Eternal too. But London Spitfire is a really interesting one, and I think a good question that comes up with Spitfire, for me, is how good is EU Contenders compared to Owl? How good is the best EU Contenders team compared to your worst, second worst, middle of the table Owl team? So that's really interesting. One kind of issue for me is the fact that they're running Calyx as one of their only support line. He didn't quite fill the role for one of the worst teams last year. So I just don't have that much confidence in him. But there's that, and then yes, that question. Hey, is Hurricanes gonna be something that can play in the big leagues?
Yeah, I just want to take this a little bit because I have a little bit of a rant. I almost put Paris ahead of London. Like, I think a lot of people are high on London, and when I think of like that's it. It's for a while there. It was you're planting the best EU Contenders team into Owl, and I have a lot of faith in European contenders, but with how much like Korean talent has came over, I think, to NA this year, like I just think that's just not going to work. I think it can work, and they won't be the worst team in the league, but I do think there is a difference between EU contenders and Overwatch League, and I much prefer the idea of what Paris did of like trying to pick the best pieces from like the second, third, and fourth team and try to create this almost like super team that you never really got to see. I will say that changed from when they picked up Shax, because I think that once you add a surefire star like Shax, I think he can bring a lot, especially in that trace role, and that helps sort of round out that DPS lineup, especially when Sparker becomes of age. I not in love with the support line. I agree that Kellogg, I think, disappointed me last year on his play on Toronto Defiant, and Toronto Defiant was a shit show, so I don't put too much on him. But at the same time, I do think the team actually looked better when Cruz came in there. Whereas a team like Paris, I actually really like a lot of their pieces. So I think this is one of those teams where London will start out well. The question will be, how will they continue as the year progresses? And once these like newer teams who have maybe less team coordination off the beginning start to figure it out, and that's when I sort of think you can start to see teams that are newly built like Paris or, Toronto or Boston or Houston figure it out and surpass London, who I don't think they have a ton of room to grow, right? Like they already have the team coordination. Like they play together for an entire year. Like I think what you're going to see at the beginning is going to be like 80, 90% of what their end year potential is, which I can't say the same for other teams. So I actually think they're going to be they'll start off well, but I think they'll fall off by the end. And I hope I'm wrong. I like the tank line, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that will be interesting to see is this theory that if you're constantly playing East Coast servers from Europe, you're kind of used to that ping, right?
Yeah.
Everyone else will have to have very differing ping ranges. Like East Coast teams will play other East Coast teams on like 15 ping or whatever, right? Or like West Coast to West Coast. Like they will have very different ping environment and ping ranges to play against. Well, the Spitfire can always sort of like, my understanding is like, unless it's of course against Paris, like they are going to have the consistent like 190 to 110 or whatever they're getting to the East Coast. And that's something you can play or like figure out. The problem is, not sure if those ping ranges are actually okay for everyone to play. So for instance, a piece of information that you will appreciate is like the Defiant legitimately couldn't play some Rhine strategies last year because of numlock being on ping.
Yeah.
Like they actively made the decision, we would like to play this comp here, but it's impossible to put numlocked on Rhine for in that ping range because you can't play Rhine on that, right? Like blocking shadows and whatnot. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So that's both for Paris and London. I think like by the circumstances of where they have to play from, there's some interesting challenges that don't all necessarily need to be terrible for them.
Yeah. No, I agree. And we can kind of move on because I think it's going to be one of those teams where it's just, the question is, how well is EU contenders in relation to Overwatch League, right? If the gap is smaller, like as some hardcore people will say, then they'll perform well, and if it's not, they'll struggle. But the LA Gladiators, this is a really cool team because this is a team that a lot of people, like I said, the Scrimbucks have them won ahead of the San Francisco Schock. Now, we haven't done our power rankings yet, but when we do, they will not be one. But I'm really excited to hear your opinion on...
Will they not be one?
I'm not putting them one. But people have. So you get a guy like Moth in there, some stuff can happen. Yiska, what have you been, hearing about sort of LA Gladiators and what's their sort of ceiling?
Now, okay, here's my problem with the LA Gladiators number one because scrims. I don't like the people that make this claim. It's really weird. They have seen the Shock in that environment as well.
Yeah.
Now, of course, keep in mind, yes, the Shock actually have never won a regular season, even though they've been super dominant, right? Like in season 2, like Titans finished ahead of them in the regular season schedule. Last year was Philly. So yes, theoretically speaking, you could make the case that the same pattern will be the case once again. I would say though that because tournaments are so much more important this year, like if there was a year that the San Francisco Shock, were they to be able to play like they usually do in the last 2 years, they would just like win the regular season as well based on the bonus victories, right?
Yeah.
So, in that regard, like for the Gladiators themselves, like I think like they are one of the teams that actually went wider than they had to, and then that other teams did. Some of the substitutes are kind of interesting. Like Scoot is like, who? Like maybe we're like completely being blindsided by this guy's ability. Then again, like only ever going to come out in double flex support situations because, I mean, people also sleep a little bit on Shu. Like,
I think people. First of all, I think people hella sleep on Shu. I think Shu is actually in that like S+ tier of flex supports. So I'll let you finish, but I disagree. I think Shu is like actually the real deal. I think this is one of the best sports lines in the league. But sorry.
Yeah, I think he was like the one. Like when that became clear that there's a possibility to get him in the transfer market, I think a lot of people were ready to throw a bag at him.
Yeah.
And, in that regard, like, I mean, the backline on paper should be credible, right? Yeah. There's an interesting point about Moth where you could make the argument that we're moving away from like we've established. Yes, we've like established a baseline of communication in everyone and a meta understanding. So do you need like a shot calling type of controlling type of not like super mechanical? Because yes, he's like probably the best Mercy in the league. He's not the best Lucio in the league from a mechanical point of view. there I'm looking at Lee Jae-gon or FD God, right?
Yeah.
So let's see how that develops. Yeah, in that regard, like I think that roster has just very few weaknesses. It's also the crowning season, so to speak, for DPay. Like, if you don't do it this season, then, I mean, like,
who knows?
Yes, this field is really competitive, but you also got it all now, right?
Exactly.
You have an incredible roster. I think this is also the season where, like, almost like the last season. Honestly, like I was a little bit of a Birdring doomer for the longest time.
Yeah.
And then, like, last season, he really impressed me what he could do outside of that Spitfire team.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, this is once again, like, from in essence, probably not a story that dissimilar from Carpe, in terms of like just being the hard carry type of player that he can be, and also in clutch situations. So looking forward to that. And yeah, I mean the tank line is, I don't know, like in essence, if you think about it, like having space as your weakest starter, like at least how we tally up, like, you know, power levels.
Yeah.
Is a nice problem to have in overall.
Yeah.
Right.
It is. All right. Paris Eternal. I'll let Spencer. I'll let you comment on Paris Eternal.
I'll be quick.
So builds on the storyline.
Yeah. So just to bring a little bit back to the guys, I kind of agree with Yiska. I think that I think there's a little bit more question marks than just base. I think Muse might be overrated. I think like Mir and Burwing could potentially fall out, but I agree with your ceiling. I think their support line is one of the best in the league, and I do agree about the mod theory. In terms of Paris Eternal, I actually, again, we can be quick because kind of similar to London. How well is the EU talent going to translate? I actually kind of really like this team on paper. I think Neptuno and Khan, if Neptuno can come back and do the things that he was doing beforehand, I think it can actually be a pretty decent support line. I know Onigod is really good. It sucks that we can't see him not on pink, but at the very least, if it's more of an even playing field, I think he's got a bit of a higher ceiling. Naga's really talented. Aliva looked great. Now he gets to play where there's like no communication issues, right? He gets to play on a full European roster. And Dawn is a bit of a question mark, but if he is, better than Bembest, although Bembest was pretty good last year. So if you just take the Paris scouting for what it is, and you just say, okay, well, if Bembest was clearly better, then they would have picked Bembest. I think this team actually has a potential higher ceiling than London. They have a lower expected value, I would say. So if your power rankings, I understand why you put London. They're the safer pick. But I think if they're firing at all cylinders, maybe that's too hot of a take. Because they do have Shacks. But they're firing at all cylinders, I actually think they can do pretty good.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would change there is, I think, London has both like high expected value and higher pop-off potential theoretically.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to what that experiment looks like in practice, in actual play, right? Like the scouting each other type of thing, like players giving feedback on coaches, coaches giving feedback on players type of thing. You gotta, if you're a one-man army, you gotta be inventive. But like, if that's actually something that works, looking forward to that. Like, I think there's many reasons to cheer for the Paris Eternal next year. And honestly, really the only thing that they can realistically do is surprise, because I think the bottom line expectations has to be that they're like a bottom 3 team.
For sure.
Exactly.
I think that, I think putting them ahead of London is probably too hot of a take. I think that once they got Shaq, even I was like, fuck, I gotta take this hot take back. I wanted to make it, but I couldn't. I think they're being a little bit underrated in terms of like London being clear 1, them being clear 2, because there's some pieces on this team that I do like, but I agree.
Exactly. No, I think San Francisco Shock should be a quick one. I mean, I didn't think that they could clearly make a team better, but like, I debatably thought they made a team better. Like, FD Godra in there, like, I mean, it's just crazy how still great they are.
Glister can have a year and a half. I think that's going to be an interesting one to watch. If Krusty can do Krusty things to Glister, like, people forget how highly Glister was rated coming into that year, right? I think he like was on a really weird London team in APAC, and not everyone was talking about him. But going into the year, it wasn't like, oh man, look at XC, right? Like Edison, like these are names that were talked about. But I think Glister was like arguably the shining jewel of like that sort of DPS class next to Sparkle and what he can do. So I'm really excited to see what the Shock can sort of do with him. On top of the fact that, man, if FD God is, if they can still not lose too much of the leadership in Moth, like his mechanics on paper, this team should be really fucking good.
Yeah. I mean, there's no reason to expect that they would fall from grace. The only thing that I guess is a little interesting is like, one aspect of Krusty was also that he always had like good coaching staff, generally speaking.
Fair enough. That's actually a good point.
He bled a lot over the years, right? In terms of like now Junkbug is gone, Arachne is with charge, had 9K before. He's in a different team, so not only is he like does he have to like raise new disciples, he's also playing against them now.
Yeah.
And yeah, that will be interesting. Of course, like for me, once again, title favorite.
No, I agree. And also my last thing is just this support line's unfair. FD God, Twilight, and Violet.
Sure.
I think is unfair. I think this should be G8. You know what I mean?
Rest in peace.
Yeah.
Rest in peace healing. Like, geez Louise. Okay. Our favorite, quote unquote favorite, Toronto Defiant. You know what? This team I think is defined by risk. I straight up. I think they have an opportunity with, Aztec, Asunje, Neist to perform, but we just don't know enough about them to know whether or not they're going to be a high mid-table to possibly high team or be in the place that some people have put them in their power rankings right now.
Yeah. I mean, we'll let you take this on the Yiska because we've given our opinion. I would just agree with Chris in terms of risk. Arguably unnecessary risk. I think there was some unnecessary risk here taken. But yeah, I'm curious to hear your opinion on them because, we definitely given ours before.
I think this is a team that, will make playoffs. Not sure if they will ever see Hawaii, to be fair. Mm-hmm. I think this might be a little bit out of reach for them. It's also like the team that KDG can once again prove that he's like a top tier coach.
Yep, I agree.
I also think there's some organizational curse going on, whether tangible or intangible, in terms of like why these seemingly like pretty good talents on these rosters, all of them come back to the Overwatch League, right? Like thinking Yakpong, IM37, these types of players, Ivy for sure. So yeah, on paper this looked like, honestly, like I had them on paper probably 6th, 7th, like behind like the Mayhem types or whatever. Yeah, a little bit surprised by the scrum rumors, but we will see. Like, once again, like games are decided on the server, not on in practice.
I agree, and I think I just saw Lastro come in. I wonder if they were scrimming with Lastro or without Lastro, or if he was playing, he was on ping. If this team doesn't work out, and it's because like maybe Sato is underperforming or Jesus is underperforming, I kind of give them the pass. Honestly, I think those are good players. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Yeah. Sometimes you take a risk on a player, you think he's good, and he just has an off year or doesn't perform to what he was on the previous team. But if I look at players like Neist and Michelle and like Unsinjay, maybe I've actually heard decent things about him and Element Mystic and stuff like that. I get that. But like I felt like this was a really good flex DPS class of like Valentine, Assassin, and Pelican. And then there was 2 really big free agents in Rascal and Libero who were like proven talents. And then you go out there and get Neist, who is like, I can't think of somebody who could be this year's Who Are You or Flower. I like everything is aligning perfectly. And if that happens and he doesn't work out, I'm like something at that point the organization's got to foresee that coming. So I'll give them like that will like hurt my brain as like a big fan of this team, because I think that was a really weird risk to take as their only projectile DPS player. I mean, technically Agility is a content creator. Like if things don't work out, do you bring him back in? Like I don't know, but I actually wouldn't. I don't know, right? Like who knows? But anyways, there's some weird risks here. I like the Lastro acquisition. I think that helped round that support line.
Sure.
Michelle is a big question mark for me, but if he looked good in season 2, so if he can bounce back, then this team has potential. That DPS lineup though concerns me a little bit. I'm surprised that that's the one they went with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Vancouver Titans. We're getting to the weeds a little bit here. we're kind of in it.
Man. I don't think this is like. Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, nah. I'm just nothing. Not a lot's gonna happen. Like they just weren't.
Yeah. So what's your opinion on this team? Can they outperform people's expectation?
No.
Cool. Okay. Washington.
yeah. I will say this though. I like Shredlock. Shredlock gets a little bit of hate. I think Shredlock and Dalton are pretty good pieces. I'm happy to see Fire come back. Yeah. Okay. We can move on.
Yeah. Honestly, there's really nothing else apart from that.
Like, there are a lot of likable players on that team, and I think like for me, like that was one of the most ridiculously botched off-season moves, like rushing to sign players not realizing that if everyone downsizes, naturally speaking, there will be a lot of great Overwatch League players outside the team.
Yeah.
Of course, they couldn't have foreseen, for instance, like a Valiant collapse or whatever. I mean, fair enough. But yeah, there's still a ton of players outside, even for their signing sort of like mold.
Yeah.
So
put Sharp on this team,
was...
even, man. Like, Sharp would have fit this team nicely, but yeah.
Yeah. All right, last one, Washington Justice. This on, if you guys had seen a recent episode of Main Esports, was probably our top, growth team from one of the, worse than league last year.
I'm drinking the Kool-Aid.
Possibly one of the better ones.
I'm drinking all the Kool-Aid. No, I'm buying all the stonks. I'll buy anybody's watching. I've seen people put like 5 or 6.
I'm drinking Decay's Kool-Aid.
I'll buy them. Yeah, give me the stonks. I said this about Philly last year. People like Avast had them at like 7 or whatever. I was like, I'll buy all the Philly stonks. I think this team's going to overperform people's expectations. And this is my year's Philly, where I've seen people put them like 6, 7. And I seriously think that this could be, I think this is easily a top 3 team and could really push like the San Francisco Shock in the right metas, in the right tournament.
Yeah, for sure. Like my one concern for them is like, can they consistently maintain a great internal atmosphere? I think the organization has financially invested a ton into making that work. I think if anyone follows Priest Twitter, that's the general manager of the Washington Justice, he seems to take great pride in building up the infrastructure. Is pretty transparent about that. I think you thought, okay, they got Decay, and then like basically they kept adding, and then at the latest at Fury, you just had to start taking this team seriously, right?
Yeah. There's too much firepower.
I guess there's some question marks about Supreme as a head coach.
Yep. That
one could fairly mention. From asking around, those that there are not big concerns in that regards. Like there's people in the Overwatch League that vouch for his ability as like someone that can maintain a great atmosphere internally as well. And yeah, I mean Decay. Incredible, right?
Yeah, Megan Fury could be, I think, the best tank line in the league. I think Decay, sure. Assassin. I'll say Jerry and Tuba just in case, but I think Decay and Assassin, if that works, could seriously be like the best 1-2 punch in the league. Like they have the potential. They probably won't. Like you got people in the Shock and again Atlanta who would debate that, but I really liked Assassin from Contenders. When I look back on the VODs, I was a big fan of his. And I think those 4
Jerry's
are so good. Jerry's overlooked too in the right role. Tuba can play Genji, right? Like you have that rounded out. Technically, for some reason, if Fury doesn't work out, you have Rhea there. And the support line is, it's not the shining point of this team. But I think that those 4 are so good, it doesn't really matter. I think the biggest concern is if this team like implodes. I think they got a lot of personalities on this team. And if that doesn't work out, then you could foresee an issue. But if they figure that aspect out, dude, I am really high on this team. That's my I think they're good.
I feel that. And hey, I can't believe we made it through all those. Hey, just to round this out, 2 quick questions for you, Yiska. We kind of alluded to it before. First one, novice that you're most excited about, rookie of the year potential. Second, anybody that didn't get picked up, that you were like, hey, I think this person should get picked up, and it's a shame that they haven't yet.
Okay, so first one, I think for me, Mac and Pelican, as well as also like offshoot name Choice One. It's like for the Charge, like these guys. Actually, also quite interesting that Charge got him. I think a lot of people were really high. There's actually a ton of rookies where it's like really hard to evaluate, but like Pelican and Mac, for me, like it's always really hard to evaluate across role, right? And then in terms of like, okay, who wasn't picked up that should have been? I mean, Libero is always like the easy answer there, I think. Another one that really surprised me was Whoop, because like, if you guys remember, like this entire narrative of like Wub being like considered for the Shock, that's true. How is nobody else looking at him though? Especially like with so many teams wanting to have a Western, like for instance, like even the initial Valiant roster felt weird to go back to agilities. Like again, like it's also the story told around agility is probably a little bit worse than his performance in the Overwatch League actually has been.
I agree.
But yeah, that's a weird one where, like, I mean, Vancouver once again, like Teru is just so weird in comparison to like getting Wub on, right?
Man, if you took that Vancouver team and you put like Wub in there and you put, you know, Sharp in there and then you put like Adam in there from the LA Valiant, like I'm feeling all of a sudden way better at that team. And you probably get a flex support in there just to back up Rolf, because I mean I love Rolf, he's Canadian, but I don't know how he's gonna, you know, stack up against the other talent there. But you know what I mean? Like,
I don't think
those alone, all of a sudden, that's like a much better team in my opinion.
I'll give you a little bit of spice there. I don't think there's a bigger difference in the Overwatch League in the respective roles than between Rolf and the rest of the field. Like,
I agree.
Like, flex support is so stacked.
Stacked. You're looking at who's the second worst? Like, Khan, right? Rippa? Like, those are good players.
Yep. And
that's no disrespect.
I mean, Rolf is also ancient. Like, I remember in watching 2016 or something, right?
So I love having him on there as a leadership. And if it was a double flex support meta, could he be your second flex support? Yeah, like he's no scrub, right? Like, I mean, it sounds we're knocking him, but we're only knocking him because we're comparing him to like Shu and shit, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like the field of flex support is so stacked. And if you want the Canadian flag on that roster and you want the leadership, give him a shot, right? I don't know what the internal workings of that team were. I'm sure there's reasons why they have him. But how do you not go out there and at least try to get a potential backup? Like, I don't know. That seemed super weird to me. So I agree. But yeah, anyways, I agree with all your picks. I think Piggy's the only one I would add in there for potential rookie of the year. I think Piggy, actually, I heard really, really good things about him. I think that if Houston, I think that, again, that Scrimbucks, they're like fourth. If Houston really overperforms, I think it's going to be because, you said Happy, so maybe that's why. Maybe it's Happy. I thought
it can't be just one guy, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think Piggy could get some credit if he's popping off alongside Happy. Because I think a lot of people were originally low on Houston. So if they actually become this like top 5, 6, 7 team, I could see him getting a decent amount of credit. So, and I would love to see Libra on the league as well. Same with Adam, man. Adam deserves a shot. I feel so fucking bad for Adam. He got that close from coming from Australian contenders. Sign Adam. That's what I want. I want Adam in the league. I've heard great things about him, and he's popped off in that first contenders tournament. So, I'd like to see him get picked up.
Exactly. Well, hey, Yiska, great conversation. Thanks for hopping on. I really appreciate your time. It looks like it's 1:30 in the morning for you. So I don't know how you haven't drank a couple of Red Bulls through this conversation here and been able to stay with it. But guys, hey, if you like what we chat about, if you enjoyed this conversation, please let us know what your thoughts are below, like and subscribe. And we're going to put all of Yiska's socials in the description below. So make sure to like his content, follow his Twitter. You're going to be seeing all those 100% accurate, roster predictions too. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you much for coming on, Yiska. I really appreciate it. As always, guys, enjoy.